Marissa Lane's dream was to see the open roads of America, but somewhere along Nevada's empty highways, that dream turned into her grave. Frank Dorsey, the truck driver she trusted, vanished the moment her body was found, leaving behind nothing but a fake name, a burned farm, and a story the desert refused to bury. In the silence of the Nevada sun, the Nowhere Girl was born, a mystery stitched together by lies, dust, and the echo of a name that never belonged to her. The morning air was crisp, the kind that makes the desert seem endless and unforgiving. A local jogger, Michael Trent, was following his usual route along a dusty path just beyond the Reno city limits. It was quiet, except for the distant hum of the highway and the soft crunch of gravel beneath his shoes. As the sun began to rise, casting long golden streaks across the barren land, something in the sand caught his eye, a flash of white, half buried near a cluster of rocks. At first, he thought it was trash, but as he stepped closer, the shape became unmistakable. It was a human hand, pale against the dirt, motionless. Panic surged through him. His breath quickened as he stumbled backward, fumbling for his phone. Within an hour, the quiet stretch of desert was swarming with sheriff's vehicles, forensic teams, and yellow police tape fluttering in the wind. Reporters would later describe the scene as eerily calm, a young woman lying as if gently placed by unseen hands. She appeared peaceful, her clothes clean, her face untouched by the violence that so often accompanied such discoveries. There were no signs of struggle nearby, no drag marks, no vehicle tracks. She seemed to have simply appeared out of nowhere. When the coroner arrived, it became clear the woman had not been dead long. Her body temperature, the faint traces of dust on her shoes, and the lack of decomposition suggested she had been alive less than 24 hours before her discovery. But the strangest part was what was missing. She had no purse, no phone, no jewelry, not even a scrap of identification. Her fingerprints didn't match any database. Her dental records led nowhere. To the investigators, she was no one, and so they called her Jane Doe. The story spread quickly through Reno and the nearby small towns. People gathered around televisions in diners and gas stations, staring at the sketch of her face released by the police. She was young, early 20s, with dark hair and soft features. Someone must have known her, yet no one came forward. Not a single missing person report matched her description. The mystery deepened with every passing day. The media soon gave her a name, the Nowhere Girl. It stuck, echoing through every headline, every late-night talk show segment that tried to unravel her story. The public was captivated, not just by her death, but by the haunting emptiness surrounding her life. Who was she? Why was she left in the middle of nowhere? Forensics finally uncovered one small clue that gave investigators a direction. Tiny grains of yellow pollen were found in her lungs, belonging to a rare wildflower that grew only in certain parts of the Nevada desert. It meant she had been alive when she inhaled it somewhere nearby. That detail changed everything. She hadn't been brought there after death. She had been there before she died. Somewhere in that vast, silent landscape, the truth of the Nowhere Girl was buried, waiting for someone to dig it out. Detectives began their search by retracing the girl's last known movements, though there were none officially recorded. The only possible lead came from the gas stations and diners that lined Highway 395, a lonely stretch often traveled by truckers, drifters, and tourists passing through. Officers distributed her photo everywhere, hoping someone might remember seeing her face. Days turned into weeks before a waitress from a small roadside diner just outside Reno called in with a quiet, trembling voice. She believed she had seen the girl 3 days before the body was found. The waitress described her as polite but distant, wearing the same light blue blouse seen in the coroner's photos. She sat at the far end of the diner, facing the window, drinking black coffee that went cold before she ever touched it. She didn't speak much, didn't seem afraid, but her eyes never stopped scanning the parking lot. When she left behind a napkin with something scribbled faintly on it, a number written in shaky handwriting, 14. At first, detectives thought it meant nothing. But the detail nagged at them until they realized a motel stood just 15 miles down the same road, its sign barely lit, its most recent room registered as number 14. When officers arrived at the old Desert Ridge Motel, the place looked forgotten, sun-faded, and half-abandoned. The manager, an aging man who barely looked up from his television, mentioned that a young woman had checked into room 14 the week before using the name Lydia Marsh. The name didn't ring any bells, but the ID she used was clearly fake, the photo grainy, the barcode printed wrong. The woman had stayed only one night, paid in cash, and vanished before morning. Inside the room, investigators found subtle but unsettling traces of a struggle. The mirror above the sink was cracked, and a faint bloodstain marked the corner of the bathroom counter. Beneath the bed frame, a small earring glinted in the flashlight beam, a match to one worn by the Nowhere Girl. A suitcase had been left open on the chair, empty but for a broken zipper and a torn lining. There are no fingerprints on the doorknob, no signs of forced entry, and the room key was missing. It was as though someone had carefully erased every sign of who she had been, except for what they wanted found. The motel security camera, old and unreliable, had recorded only one blurry figure leaving late that night. The person was tall, wearing a cap and a heavy jacket, and carried something large and heavy toward the back parking lot. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. Minutes later, the footage cut out. When investigators tried to restore the data, they discovered the tape had been partially overwritten. The clue led nowhere, but it shifted the tone of the investigation. The Nowhere Girl hadn't simply wandered into the desert. She had been there with someone who had gone to great lengths to make sure no one would ever know. Yet every erasure left a shadow, and detectives began to suspect that the girl's story, hidden beneath layers of dust and deceit, had only just begun to surface. Months passed with no new answers, and the Nowhere Girl case began to fade from public attention. But one afternoon, a small discovery reignited the investigation. A local photographer, sorting through a box of old Polaroids from traveling fair, found an image that made his hands tremble. In the background, half hidden by sunlight glare, stood the girl from the desert. She was unmistakable, same hair, same features, standing beside a man in a brown leather jacket. The date written on the photo's border read February 9th, just 3 days before her body was discovered. The man's face was turned away, but a long, thin scar running from his jaw to his neck was visible. Detectives scanned the photo into their database, running facial recognition until a match appeared. Frank Dorsey, a long-haul truck driver with a criminal history involving assault, theft, and smuggling across state lines. He had last been seen at a Nevada truck stop 2 days before the girl's death. The connection was too close to ignore. Investigators secured a warrant and began searching for him, but he had already vanished from every known address. His phone was disconnected, and his employer hadn't heard from him in weeks. A break came when Highway Patrol located his truck abandoned near a rest area close to Carson City. The engine was cold, the cab empty, and the back compartment spotless except for fine desert sand scattered across the floor. Tucked beneath the driver's seat, officers found a torn scrap of fabric. Lab testing confirmed it matched the same material as the dress the Nowhere Girl had been wearing. Inside the glove compartment lay a camera lens cap, identical to the one missing from the photographer's old Polaroid camera, the very model used at the fair. Forensic teams combed through every inch of the vehicle. Beneath the layer of dust in the trailer bed, luminol revealed faint traces of blood, but not enough for a clear DNA profile. Investigators began to suspect that Frank Dorsey hadn't just met the girl. He had been with her in her final hours. Witnesses from the fair recalled seeing a man with a scar matching Dorsey's description standing near the Ferris wheel, talking to a young woman fitting her appearance. Some said she looked uncomfortable. Others remembered her smiling nervously, as if trying to hide unease. Detectives pieced together a timeline. The fair on February 9th, the diner sighting on the 10th, and the motel check-in that night. Every thread led back to Dorsey. Yet, despite the evidence, he was gone. No activity on his bank accounts, no use of his driver's license, no sign of his truck registration anywhere. It was as if he had dissolved into the desert air. The case files grew thicker, filled with speculation, but no closure. Investigators began to wonder if the Nowhere Girl had known him before, or if their meeting had been purely by chance. The photos seemed to whisper an unspoken connection. Two people bound together for a brief, fatal moment, both destined to disappear into Nevada's endless emptiness. 2 years after the Nowhere Girl's body was found, the Nevada desert offered up another secret. A drought had dried up a small patch of land on abandoned property north of Reno, revealing the mouth of a shallow, well hidden under cracked boards and weeds. When local children exploring the area dropped a stone inside, they heard the hollow clatter of metal. Authorities were called, and what they uncovered deepened the mystery even further. Inside the well were fragments of burned belongings, warped bits of jewelry, scorched fabric, and several rusted metal objects that looked like the remains of a suitcase. Forensic teams carefully sifted through the ashes until one small piece caught their attention: a half-melted bracelet engraved with the name Lydia. Investigators immediately linked it to the false identity used by the Nowhere Girl when she checked into the motel. It was the first physical connection between that alias and a real location. Records showed the land had once belonged to Samuel Dorsey, Frank Dorsey's late father, who had owned a small livestock farm there before his death in 2009. Since then, the property had sat untouched, slowly deteriorating under the desert sun. The old farmhouse was nothing more than a skeleton of wood and dust, its windows broken, its roof half collapsed. But when forensic specialists examined the grounds, they discovered tire tracks preserved beneath a layer of hardened soil, fresh enough to suggest someone had driven there not long before the drought exposed the well. Neighbors who lived miles down the road told investigators they occasionally saw headlights flickering on the property late at night, usually around the time the Nowhere Girl's case had been dominating local news. They assumed it was trespassers or teenagers exploring the ruins, never suspecting a connection to the missing woman. The discovery reignited interest in Frank Dorsey, but his trail had gone completely cold. Even his known associates hadn't heard from him in years. The bracelet engraved with Lydia wasn't just jewelry. Its unique clasp and metal type matched a local artisan's work sold only in a few small Reno shops. Detectives tracked down the craftsman, who confirmed he had sold that exact piece to a man with a scar along his neck. He remembered it vividly because the man had requested the name Lydia be engraved on it. That detail twisted the case into something even more chilling. The name wasn't chosen by the victim. It had been chosen for her. Investigators began to theorize that Frank had brought the woman to the old farm. The rare wildflower pollen found in her lungs grew abundantly around that property. Everything pointed to it being the last place she was alive. Yet there was no proof of what had happened there. No human remains, no conclusive evidence of murder. The well, filled with burned fragments, felt like a grave without a body. As the sun set over the cracked land, officers sealed the property with caution tape, but the wind soon tore it away. The desert, as always, took back what it was given. The Nowhere Girl's story, once buried beneath silence and sand, had found its next chapter in the ashes of a forgotten farm. For years after the discovery of the bracelet, the case that once captivated Nevada had turned into a cold file buried under newer crimes. But technology had evolved, and when a forensic lab in Oregon ran old DNA samples through a newly upgraded database, a match flashed on the screen. The Nowhere Girl was not Lydia Marsh. Her real name was Marissa Lane, a 24-year-old woman from Portland who had vanished after posting an online ad seeking a travel companion for a cross-country trip. She had written that she wanted to see the desert before settling down. That post had been answered by someone using the alias Frank D. When the news reached Reno, investigators reopened the file. Marissa's digital trail revealed a few short email exchanges with Frank, filled with casual talk about truck routes and scenic stops. Nothing about them suggested danger. But the final message, sent 3 days before her death, mentioned they would meet at a fairground outside Reno, the same fair where the old Polaroid had captured them together. The discovery tied every loose thread into one chilling picture. Yet a new mystery appeared as investigators revisited the motel records. The name Lydia Marsh hadn't just been a random alias. It had been used again several days after Marissa's death on a credit card application filed in California under a fake address. Surveillance footage from a post office showed a tall man mailing something that day, a man with a scar along his neck. The theory shifted. Frank Dorsey hadn't just murdered her. He had tried to rewrite her identity. Detectives began tracing his movements across several states, piecing together fragments from gas station logs and truck route records. His last known location was a scrapyard in Arizona, where an old, dismantled freight truck was found stripped of identification numbers. The vehicle's serial plate had been filed off, but one faint engraving on a spare part matched his missing rig. It was all that remained of him. No remains were ever found. No one ever heard his voice again. What haunted investigators most was the calculated nature of the deception. Frank had deliberately created Lydia Marsh, a name that existed only on paper and in ashes. The bracelet, the motel registration, the napkin, even the fake ID had been planted to send the investigation spinning in circles. He had erased Marissa's life and replaced it with someone who never existed. Marissa's family finally received the confirmation they had waited years for. She had left home full of hope and adventure, never knowing she was stepping into the path of a predator who lived like a ghost. Her ashes were returned to Oregon, but the desert where she was found remains unmarked. Locals still call the stretch of land Nowhere Mile. Some nights, travelers claim to see the faint outline of a woman standing by the roadside, her hair moving with the wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon, forever searching for the life she lost and the name that was never truly hers.